In 2010, during the peak of military team shooters focused on online play, Singularity took a different approach by offering a slower pace and a stronger emphasis on story. Imagine being able to manipulate time, rewrite the past, and change the future. That's the premise of this game that unfortunately got lost in the shuffle and ended up being the last original project from the talented Raven Software. Singularity emerged in the middle of the massive popularity of Call of Duty and Battlefield, offering an experience reminiscent of early 2000s. It featured alternate timelines, a gravity gun, and even the famous bullet time. Developed on Unreal Engine 3, this game has an aesthetic that screams 7th generation, with those washed out colors and the infamous piece filter. While this style hasn't aged that nicely in some games, it works surprisingly well here, and at least for me it's really nostalgic. But behind all this potential, Singularity went through many issues during development and was almost cancelled. The final version ended up being somewhat different from what was initially shown in the trailers and from the team's original vision. Before diving into the review, it's important to provide some context about the troubled development and how the final version of the game was affected. The original project was more ambitious, featuring third-person cutscenes, more frequent use of time manipulation, and a greater variety of environmental objects to be used during combat. However, during that time, Singularity was the only original IP in development, with other Activision studios focused on creating sequels for established franchises. The game struggled to run on PS3, to fit within the 360's memory limitations, and even reach an acceptable frame rate on high-end PCs of the time. And after an Activision executive visited the studio and saw how badly the game was running, the idea was to cancel the project. After things calmed down, development was handed over to another team at Raven Software, and they were given a mere 10-month deadline to release the game. The story had to be modified, with some larger set-piece moments and events set around the time manipulation device getting scrapped. Similar to BioShock, part of the plot had to be explained through audio logs and explainer videos. According to the developers, only a fraction of the initial ideas survived to the final version of the game. For instance, some of the time manipulation device mechanics were significantly simplified due to time constraints. Additionally, the rushed development led to some oversights, such as the lack of subtitles and achievements on the PC version. Surprisingly, Singularity received positive reviews. Despite not being a commercial success, it avoided the disastrous fate it seemed destined for when Activision considered cancelling the project. So, is it worth it playing Singularity after all those years? Well, let's take a look. At the height of the Cold War, on an island called Katorga 12, the Russians discovered E-99, an element with the potential to change the course of the arms race. They began conducting experiments which were interrupted by a mysterious accident that ended their plans, turned the island into an abandoned wasteland, and led the Russians to erase all records of any activity that went on there. In 2010, with the world having followed the course we know, an American satellite detected an unexpected amount of radiation. Fearing that Russia might be hiding another Chernobyl-like accident, a special American team is sent to investigate the place. This is where you step into the role of Captain Nathaniel Renko. But the helicopter carrying the team is shot down by an electromagnetic pulse and you wake up on the island of Katorga 12. That's the premise of Singularity. From there, you explore this fictional island, with its abandoned facilities, secret labs, and desolate landscapes. The atmosphere is one of the game's highlights, with varied, dark, and oppressive environments contrasted by time travel sequences and old videos that show how the place actually looked in its glory days. Although not necessarily unique or groundbreaking, especially for its time, the visual style works exceptionally well here, adding weight and context to the story. The environments are interesting and diverse, with plenty of room to explore and search for secret areas and hidden items, as well as projectors and audio recorders that reveal more of the story. The washed-out colors intensifies the radioactivity and distressing atmosphere of the island, creating an uncomfortable and dangerous environment. The sense of danger is reinforced by a tense soundtrack and the sounds echoing through the corridors, which are apparently not as empty as they seem. At least in the beginning, the game has a certain dose of horror and survival elements. And the rotten plants, rusting machines, and bodies lying around create an unsettling feeling that something very serious and sudden happened here, but the occasional trips to the past reveal that things weren't always this way. It doesn't take long before you're attacked by a mutant, confirming that there is something very strange happening on the island. You soon discover that the former inhabitants have been transformed into terrifying and aggressive enemies. You can also see distortions in the timeline, bringing back events that occurred near the major accident that created the Singularity. The Time Manipulation Device, or TMD, makes the environments more interactive, allowing you to age or de-age objects, either to recover information and items from recorders and loot boxes, or to solve puzzles. It also works as a gravity gun, allowing you to use some environmental objects during combat. And speaking of combat, the arsenal available here delivers what you'd expect from a good shooter and also takes advantage of the freedom that a storyline like this offers, allowing you to slow down time and even control the direction of some projectiles. For the basic part of the arsenal, we have the starting pistol, a shotgun, an assault rifle, and a particularly powerful minigun. But the game's standout features are the special weapons that, in a way or another, make use of the E99 energy. These include a sniper rifle with a satisfying slow motion option, a railgun, a grenade launcher with radio-controlled grenades, a seeker rifle where you can control the projectile, and a rocket launcher that allows for the rocket to be guided. The time manipulation device can also be used in combat, similar to the gravity gun in Half-Life 2. Defensively, it allows you to pick up grenades or explosive barrels thrown at you and release an energy wave that repels and stuns nearby enemies. Offensively, you can throw back those explosive barrels and other items scattered around the environment, though the variety is limited mostly to cryo tanks and explosive barrels, much less than what's seen in Half-Life 2 or from their original intentions. Finally, you can create a time distortion to slow down all enemies within an area, allowing you to steal their weapons and blast through without much issue. Your arsenal is limited to 2 weapons at a time, but ammo isn't a major issue as it's easily found scattered throughout the environment, in restorable boxes, on enemies, and can also be purchased at upgrade panels. Weapons can be upgraded to increase basic stats like damage, reload speed, and magazine size, which can significantly enhance Renko's abilities by the end of the game, making combat almost too easy, especially if you focus your upgrades on your most used weapons. This is a short and linear game, where you always have a clear objective and even a sort of GPS activated by the TMD that shows you which direction to go. Similar to Bioshock, you receive guidance through radio message and also in some personal encounters with your 2 allies as you strive to restore the timeline. Even with this linear nature, it's worth exploring the environments to find items, ammo, and unlock new upgrade options. You can also find graffiti, audio, and video recordings that can be de-aged to reveal more of the story. The game features some puzzles that make creative use of TMD, requiring you to move objects, age, de-age, or even slow them down to access other areas. They don't occur regularly, but again, the variety is so limited that you quickly understand what needs to be done, and it doesn't pose much of a challenge. Throughout the campaign, you will receive TMD upgrades and can also find new perks and purchase enhancements like increasing the device's energy capacity, your maximum health, and how many health kits you can carry. These upgrades combined with the weapon enhancements can quickly make your character overpowered. Developed by a studio with an extensive experience in shooters, the game's combat is satisfying though relatively simple and the enemy variety isn't that impressive. However, this isn't a major issue since the campaign can be completed in just 6 hours. Enemies consist of different types of mutants and traditional soldiers with varying degrees of protection, along with few boss fights to add some variety. As you progress, your enemies become slightly faster and tougher, and at one point you navigate an area with blind enemies who only react to sound, forcing you to be more stealthy and quiet. The TMD can also be used to affect your enemies, either aging them to the point of becoming skeletons, turning soldiers into monsters, or rejuvenating monsters back into soldiers and slowing them down. Overall, despite not having a frenetic pace, the combat is quite aggressive. You don't move quickly, can only sprint for short bursts, and carry just 2 weapons, requiring you to be more deliberate with your movement and attacks. However, the damage dealt to enemies and the weapon feedback are excellent. The main issue lies in the difficulty scaling. With upgrades to weapons, the TMD, and your inventory, the difficulty drops significantly from mid-game onwards, and there is no option to change the difficulty during the campaign. So if you're looking for a challenge, consider starting on the hard difficulty. After waking up on the island and exploring the abandoned apartments, a school, and a museum, a sudden energy surge transports you back to the 50s. Amidst a fire in the facility, you rescue a man who was about to fall. Upon returning to the present day, you find out that the fate of humanity has changed. The man you saved was Nikolai Demichev, and the scientific breakthroughs he made with the E99 led Russia to win the Cold War, becoming the dominant superpower, and Demichev is now the supreme leader of the world. You do manage to reunite with your fellow soldier Devlin, but shortly after, both of you are captured by Demichev and Devlin doesn't make it. You're rescued by Catherine, a member of a resistance group called Mir 12, who believes that the solution to the Singularity lies in the hands of another Russian scientist from the 50s. You then travel back in time to rescue Dr. Borisov and enable him to complete the Time Manipulation Device, or TMD. From then on, your focus is on trying to correct the timeline with their help. The plan is to rewrite history, reversing the Singularity using an E99 bomb, which obviously must be assembled and charged through different time travel trips. I'm about to discuss spoilers now, including the game's different endings, so if you want to avoid this part, skip ahead to the timestamp shown on the screen or jump to the closing chapter. After successfully assembling and detonating the bomb, seemingly destroying the Singularity, You return to the present day only to quickly realize that nothing has changed. To make matters worse, Demichev has just taken Dr. Borisov hostage. It's here that you discover the real problem wasn't the lab responsible for the E99 research, but rather Demichev's survival. By saving him during that visit to the past, Renko altered history. This ends up being a rather obvious conclusion. However, in a way that I wasn't expecting, the game gives you 4 choices of what you do in the end. You can eliminate Borisov and join Demichev, leading you to becoming one of the most important generals in the Soviet army. But with the power of the TMD and Demichev's distrust, this leads the world into another Cold War, with Renko on one side and Demichev on the other. If you choose neither side and get rid of both Borisov and Demichev before leaving, chaos will break loose, with the island's mutants escaping to the mainland and a new leader emerging in the former United States. Should you choose to side with Borisov, going back in time and preventing yourself from saving Demichev, you return to the initial scene in the helicopter. This time there's no electromagnetic pulse and the mission yields nothing. However, the old, almost submerged statue at the beginning of the game is now a monument to Dr. Borisov and his TMD. And if you stand still and do nothing, Demichev will pick up the gun from the ground and eliminate both you and Borisov. Ultimately, despite the 4 different endings, in none of them does Renko manage to restore things exactly as they were before. Singularity isn't an FPS that tries to reinvent the genre, and it shares some similarities with other games, especially BioShock and Half-Life. Yet, it still managed to deliver an interesting, fun experience that doesn't overstay its welcome. The most positive aspects are the atmosphere, both visually with diverse environments and shifts between past and present, and through the immersion created by the time manipulation mechanics. Additionally, the arsenal is creative despite being limited to 2 weapons at a time, and the combat is enjoyable enough. The story, while linear and predictable at times, serves as a good driving force, but the lack of subtitles makes it a bit difficult to follow. The combat is aggressive with great damage feedback, and the time manipulation, although not as fully explored as it could have been, is interesting. The problem is that the difficulty isn't well balanced and your character becomes overpowered towards the end. There's also a feeling that many mechanics were underutilized, especially when compared to the initial intentions. But despite all the development issues and a final result that's only a fraction of what was originally planned, I did enjoy my experience with Singularity. And if you are a fan of FPS games or just intrigued by the premise, it deserves a chance. It's worth mentioning that I didn't encounter any performance issues, nor had to use any mods or extra settings to get the game running. It was a simple install and play experience without any hiccups. And if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like or a comment. Have a great day and see you in the next video.